Welcome to the show today, folks. I'm very excited. I read a lot of books. This book today, I not only read it, the book read me. It's The Big Relief by David Zahl, and the urgency of grace for a worn-out world. Boy, what a word for today. People are just on the treadmill of life going 90 to nothing. So, yeah, thanks for your time today, Dave.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, Ken.
Yeah. Well, just share with us a little bit about yourself, personally, before we get into the book.
Sure. I am dialing in from Central Virginia. I live in Charlottesville, where the University of Virginia is. I'm married to Kate, who's an artist, a painter, and I have three boys. I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So we're right in the thick of raising young men. I work full-time for Mockingbird, which is a platform that tries to really connect or integrate slash proclaim the grace of God and in all sorts of creative ways. We have podcasts and books and conferences and a magazine and lots of websites, all that sort of stuff. But I also am on quarter-time staff at our church, Christ Church here in Charlottesville. And my duties there, I used to be the college minister. We have a lot of students who come, and now I'm one of the preachers, and I run the adult education. So I'm also at the stage of life where I'm having knee problems. So I spent the morning with the orthopedist feeling my age.
Not you too. Was it the orthopedic surgeon today?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm told I have a torn meniscus and my whole summer is going to look a little different than I thought it would.
Yeah, well, they're holding off on my situation right now, but just got to monitor it. Strain some ligaments and tendons, and
It's a lot. There's a lot of machinery in there that has to work together, I guess, in the knee. But that's me. I'm a culture vulture. I love music, especially, and movies and things like that. But I'm a writer. With most of my time, I'm a writer, really. And so I'm so glad that the book is connected.
yeah, great book. So, what prompted you to write The Big Relief? Was there something you just like? I just got to get this message out. Or you've authored several books previously.
There's a bunch of different reasons, as I think there are for a lot of authors. It made sense in a kind of a career sort of way, but that's a very dry reason. The real
Sure.
reason is Mockingbird, we've been talking about grace for years. It's central to what my understanding of God and reality and the Christian faith. And I have lacked a sort of a book that I could give to people in my orbit, at least, that didn't presume too much, either religious presumptions or perhaps even post-religious presumptions. I wanted to give a guide to grace for everybody. But the main reason I wrote it, Ken, is really that I am a person who needs to hear about the grace of God. So I'm writing to myself. I have a very loud inner critic. Every report card as I was a kid was always, he's so hard on himself. He's so hard on himself. I'm a middle child. I'm sort of a overperformer. And so the message about God's grace has just struck a very deep chord. And so I need to hear it. And the other thing is, and I wrote a little essay about why I wrote The Big Relief. And I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but where we are, we're dealing with a lot of despair culturally. And our church in particular, we've had the funerals we've done for despair related causes. And that I mean sort of addiction, overdose, or suicide. It just keeps increasing as the years go by, but even among people that seem to be very happy and well off. And I thought that nothing speaks to despair more than directly, at least in my life, than the grace of God. I do think there's something urgent about it. Grace is always urgent, but right now it feels very urgent to me and from my neighbors as well as my own soul. So there's prosaic reasons, and then there's the deeper reasons that come from my heart.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I can use all the grace I can get, man. It's a message that never gets old. If you know you need grace, that's the only way. That's not about works of the law or anything like that.
No, it's everything.
You mentioned in the introduction that we're all chasing relief. What do you mean we're all chasing relief?
Well, this is my way into the book. I wanted to frame grace as relief from pressure, and that might be the pressure in my theological understanding, we're really talking about the pressure of the law, but also the pressure of the consequences of the law, which is death. But just in general, what's the entry point into talking to people? And I kept hearing this word relief everywhere. People were saying not only relief in terms of Asheville's flooding and needing relief efforts there, but canceling your Netflix because it's just too much to keep up with and you feel so much relief, or you finally found childcare for your toddler. That feels like relief. I just felt like my life as a 40 something on the East Coast in 2025 feels like a treadmill that keeps getting faster. And the pressure, the financial pressure, the relational pressure, even the spiritual pressure just keeps mounting. And so I've so much of my coping and the coping I see around me is people searching for relief. They find that through distraction, or maybe they find that through sort of, what would you say, like anesthetic, or trying to dull the pain. You find that through addiction, but you also find that through pleasure seeking, all sorts of ways in which life is tough and we're just doing anything we can to get some relief from all these pressures. And so that was where I thought grace is a word of relief from condemnation, but it's also a word of relief from people who feel rejected, people who feel like they can't keep up, people who feel like they've got too much debt. Forgiveness is a form of grace. We experience that as relief, debt relief. Isn't that what we say? There's just so much that I wanted to find a way in emotionally that was every day and that most people could relate to, because I felt women were looking for relief, men were looking for relief, kids were looking for relief, high schoolers as well as middle-aged and retirement-aged folks. So that's what I meant.
Well,
It's different for each people.
It reminds me of the song. I know you're a music guy. David Bowie and Queen, Under Pressure.
Isn't that and that song the pressure builds during that song, and it's beautiful, but we relate to it all these years later.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's not a relief. It's not really a word that we really associate with church much, or with God or theology. Most people's concept is God. And got another burden here. They want me to go to church. Help me, Dave. But it's unfortunate that people have that's kind of their perspective on it.
Yeah, that's the sad irony, I think, is that church is seen and experienced as a place where you get more burdens or more pressure to be a good Christian or a certain type of Christian, or to climb a new ladder of holiness or righteousness, rather than a place to receive righteousness, to receive pardon, to receive absolution, and to lay your burdens down. I mean, I very much feel like Christ invites us to lay our burdens down at the foot of the cross and to give our burdens to God. That's what we do in prayer. And so, yeah, it's very much at the forefront of my mind. That's not everyone's experience of Christianity, and sometimes for good reason. People have been mistreated and manipulated, and they've experienced anything but relief. And yet in my life, Ken, like, my faith has been a relief. The Lord has been a shepherd. I realize that might be not everyone's experience, but it has been mine. And so this book is a sort of an attempt to spread that word a little bit.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a survey, I believe it was after 9/11, a period of time that Arno, one of the big survey people, that said all of these people were coming to church. They weren't coming because I asked them or you asked them, or they were just coming seeking, trying to find a sense of belonging or something in the world that was kind of falling apart. And at the end of the survey, it struck me, it said they came looking for the heart of God, but they found the hand of man in traditions and things that they felt like were meaningless. And I thought, whoa, what an indictment.
What an indictment indeed. And I mean, I think that the Christian faith still has something to say to the world. The gospel is still relevant. It just is so often muddied. In every generation, you kind of need to discover it anew. And we've seen that. I think that God, the Holy Spirit, however you want to put it, we do find this word of grace, the enlivening mercy of God. Folks do discover it. Martin Luther found it in the Bible. John Wesley actually found it through hearing Martin Luther's commentaries read. But you find it, other people find it in different ways. So I think there's something about God doesn't allow it to be buried forever, but it certainly seems to be the pattern that we try to domesticate the grace of God in ways that end up muting it and turning it into the opposite.
Yeah, I like you talk about one of your friends that she has a T-shirt. I believe her name is Sarah. She's not a drug dealer; she's a hope dealer.
Yes, she works in a church,
and I think that's what we should trade in: is the hope and the peace and the love of God, the grace of God. Yeah. So maybe define grace for us before we move on here.
Well, I try to define it in a bunch of different ways just because I think it's a big enough word, a big enough reality that it can handle different descriptions. I mean, when I was a youth minister, unmerited favor was one of our go-to descriptions of grace. I still think it's a good one. But if you go into the language of Paul, you can talk about grace as gift, a gift with no strings attached, a superabundant gift. I like to think of grace as non-contingent alliance, unwarranted generosity. It's a positive, surprising interruption in the quid pro quo that tends to dominate our lives. Those are just a few. One way love is another one that I like that my father coined a long time ago. But for the sake of the book, I say grace is the big relief at the heart of Christianity.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And I think you called grace emotional oxygen.
It's oxygen. Is the engine of the whole thing. Grace, gratitude is our response to grace, and gratitude is the engine of any kind of ethical vision of the world that we have as Christians. And if you get too far from grace, you're going to get into obligation and drudgery, and that you're going to be joylessness. So I think I could say grace is the too good to be trueness at the heart of God.
Yeah, and we have this sense of right and wrong and fairness, and we deserve this. You don't deserve someone. You don't deserve that wife you've got. She's too good for you, or that sort of thing. We have our little scales here, Dave, and everything's got to kind of balance out. But it's not that way with the Lord, is it?
No, we're all inveterate scorekeepers, is what Robert Capon once referred to human beings as. And I'm just as guilty as anyone. But yeah, we're obsessed with what we deserve and what other people deserve, what we're owed. And one of my mentors used to refer to grace as that which lies beyond deserve. And if a world in which we get what we deserve, nothing more, nothing less, is a terrifying world, I'd say. And so the reality of God's grace is what many of us, or some form of cosmic grace, however you want to put it. I think a lot of people have some hope that it might be true. They just don't articulate it that way.
Yeah, share the story about Ryan and going to the principal's office. Boy, thought he'd get a butt whooping or something.
Yeah, I talked this story early on. A young man named Ryan Hawkinsmith was writing this like 30 years after it happened, and talked about getting called to the principal's office when he was in first grade and thinking that he was going to, not knowing what was going to happen, like thinking it was the guidance counselor's office, and he was being told to approach, and thinking that maybe he was getting reprimanded or punished. And Ryan's parents were going through a divorce at this time, and it was in the 80s, and that was a little bit more stigmatized. And he was probably, I say his internal life was probably one of confusion and shame, perhaps. And instead, he met this teacher, this guidance counselor, who asked him how things were. The kid doesn't open up. And then he just says, "I have something for you." And he pushes a baseball card across the table, and it's a Pedro Guerrero rookie card. Pedro Guerrero was a huge deal in baseball at that point in time, and he was an all-star, and he just happened to be on Ryan and his dad's favorite team, and he was his favorite player. And this was later than his rookie year, so it's this kind of gift that says, I know you, I love you, this is more than you deserve or should ever expect.
Yeah.
There's something super abundant. Ryan is undone, and he says he cried for the first and only time during his parents' divorce. And then he starts writing about this 30 years later, because it was that important to him that he received this gift. And what he experienced was grace, and it shaped the rest of his life.
That you never know the impact you can have just from one small act like that, of kind of singling somebody out and ministering to them in a special way. That's a beautiful picture of grace.
And Ken, in a funny way, the rest of that article, if you look it up, he ends up calling, I think it's Mr. Thompson is his name. He ends up calling him to ask him about that moment. And of course, the man doesn't remember it.
I love it.
Isn't that how it works? Like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too. In the following chapter, you have another just picture of just forgiveness, grace. So you got a billionaire investor, Robert Smith, and he's giving a speech to the graduating class. And well, you just pick it up from there. And some people loved it and some people didn't. Where are you at on that?
It's Morehouse College, right? Isn't that where it was?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's an all-male, historically black college, and this is a few years ago. It was recent, and during the middle of the speech, he says that he's personally going to forgive the student loan debt of every member of the graduating class, that he's going to pay it. He's a billionaire and he's going to pay whatever, I think it's the tune of like $40 million or something like that. That is the
Yeah.
biggest gift that the has ever received. And of course, if you're one of the young men, you're very excited. But the response to it was you could kind of script it. And some people are thinking, well, that's very nice, but what about the people who graduated the year before? Or what about the people who are graduating the year after? And what about those people who worked and saved and did everything they could to not go into debt and sacrificed? And it's offensive. The grace that he offers, which is in this case is a form of forgiveness, debt forgiveness. The people who are on the receiving end are very excited about it. Those who are on the outside are less excited about it. And it's very telling to me because if I'd graduated the year beforehand and had $100,000 in student loan debt, you bet I'd be perturbed, shall we say. I'd be irked. But if I was
I
in
deserve
that,
some of that 40 million.
yeah, I deserve some of that. Hand it over, spread it out. But if you're one of the guys in the graduating class, that's going to give you what grace does is it freedom. You can take a lower paying job, you can buy a house earlier, you can propose to your girlfriend earlier. I don't know what it is, but it makes all the difference. So
Yeah.
that's a good example. I thought it was a
Yeah.
powerful example.
Yeah, that's a powerful just forgiveness that he did on the loans. And you share kind of a personal story there with your friend of yours, Phil, at the time. You got sideways with Phil.
You want to hear that story too?
the book.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to tell it. It's a friend of mine from high school who was a musician and he was really into heavy metal and even like really hardcore heavy metal. Not like nothing evil, but like very aggressive music. When we had a reunion in our early 20s, I sort of confronted him about it. I just sort of said, "Why do you give your life to this aggressive music? It seems to be one note." And I judged him. I judged him really harshly in this thing that he loved. And guess what? Did he say, "Oh, you're right, Dave. Maybe I should just do a 180"? No, he said he was hurt. He was genuinely hurt. And so years later, when I got married and moved back to New York, I looked him up and asked him if we could have lunch. And I just apologized. I said, I just didn't know. I don't know. I think I'd maybe had one beer too many, or I had no right to judge him in that way as his friend and to sucker punch him in that way. And I asked for his forgiveness, and he didn't have to forgive me, but he did. He forgave me, and he works in video games. He's a wonderful guy. Not everyone has that experience, but the making of amends is usually some form of reconciliation, usually involves some form of forgiveness. And for me, it was very important to receive that.
Yeah, those type of personal stories is what kind of makes the book even more powerful.
Oh, thank you.
So, and speaking of personal stories, you had another one. The next chapter felt rejected from the water polo team. So things
Yeah,
weren't going your way there, were they? It was kind of a layup. You were going to be the co-captain, brother.
I know. I was on a water polo team in high school. I was at a school in the Northeast of America that had water polo, and they always had three or two captains, and I was one of two juniors who had played every game and started every game and figured out absolute layup. I was going to be a captain, and then the team got together, they voted, and turned out they'd voted only one guy for the first and only time in the history of this program. One guy was made captain, and I still don't quite understand what happened there. But I was rejected. I mean, it was my peers, the coach, they basically said, "You are not captain material." And that when you're 16 or 17, as I was at the time, that cuts pretty deep. And so one of the ways in which I frame grace is, as when we talk about unmerited favor, it's favor and it's relief in a way from rejection. I don't know, Ken, there was an article this past week in the New York Times by David Brooks, who wrote something about kids today. It's the most rejected generation that's ever lived.
Mm.
Kids, the amount of how hard it is to get into college, internships. I mean, these are kids at elite universities, but usually instead of applying to 10 internships and getting 9 rejections, they apply to 40 internships and get 39 rejections. That's a lot of rejection. And it's very easy to apply for jobs online. You just click a button. So routinely you hear from people who've applied to 400 jobs and haven't gotten one. This is a lot of rejection. And so what I think is that although in many ways we think a no is coming because of our sin, because of our omission, because of our just self-centeredness or whatever have you, God is word to us in Jesus Christ is yes. And so that's favor. That's undeserved favor, unmerited favor. And so for me, as a person who dealt with rejection, and rejection, there's deeper rejections than it's a pretty deep rejection at 16, to be honest with you. But to be rejected by a girl, that's usually, we do everything we can to avoid that, right? To be rejected by a boss. I think grace for those who feel the pressure of rejection, which it sounds like, according to the New York Times at least, is everyone. I think the Christian word of unmerited favor is a urgently needed thing.
Yeah, I like what you said at the end of that chapter. You said God favored you enough to save you from what you wanted the most.
Yeah, I think, it was funny, Ken, like that story, I was asked to contribute to a devotional for high school kids called The Jesus I Wish I Knew in High School. And that story is what I used. And that story spoke to kids more than any other story in that book from what I heard. And like it helped sell the book. And I didn't know that, but God was actually giving me a gift, that rejection that I couldn't see at the time. And I think that my friend who was the captain who made it, Miles, the epilogue to that story is that he's become a reader of my books and listener to podcasts, and he and I reconnected recently. And part of that has to do with talking about that story. And it was an amazing reconciliation between the two of us because of that, because I surfaced it.
Yeah, yeah. It's good. Why do you think grace is such a difficult concept for people to receive? Even when they long for it with a hard time receiving it.
Well, I think there's something a little insulting about grace, or it says you can't earn, you don't have what it takes to earn God's favor or love. And so there's kind of a no that precedes the yes in a way. But it's more just, let's just think about people in your own life who have a hard time receiving gifts. They don't like the
I'm one of them.
Yeah, and I'm frankly one of them too. And that's why I have an easier time asking for help than receiving help. And I think that a lot of people are that way. We're conditioned. Men are probably conditioned more this way, or maybe it comes naturally. I don't know. But I got to be self sufficient. And grace says you're not self sufficient. And you need more than you can manufacture on your own. We resist that until it's the last option, at which point that's when, so oftentimes how God gets our attention.
Yeah, we'll take it down, huh?
It was last stop on the bus. Okay, I'll get off.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that Jesus wasn't a type A personality.
That's another chapter. When I talk about control is a burden, and that's a pressure to be in control of everything in our lives. And at least where I grew up, the message was that it's good to be type A and it's not good to be type B. And by type B is a more laissez-faire, laid back, but perhaps resigned, or lazy might be the rude word. Or type A people, type A men are leaders, and they're assertive and they get things done, and they're self-starters is always the word. And you look at the ministry of Jesus, and he just wasn't type A in the way that we think of people being type A. He wasn't optimized or nonstop activity. He took breaks. He sort of followed where the Spirit led, and those who were trying to pin him down. I mean, he took naps during the middle of the day on boats and things like that. And there's something, when he's questioned by Pilate, he goes silent. He doesn't fit into the narrative of the assertive alpha male, although we believe he's the Son of God and a servant leader in a way that we've never, he's the archetypal one. So, yeah, I think that for people like me who feel the pressure to be in control of everything, and I'm also the head of my household, and I've got to provide for 3 children and my wife, and that's a lot of pressure. And I sometimes need to hear that surrender is actually okay. When it comes to God, surrender might in fact be what God is after. Not more control, but surrender to the one who actually does have control. And I think you see that pattern in Jesus, who surrendered himself for the sake of those he loved and died. Philippians 2, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. So there's a lot in there for me. But again, see, I'm trying to get at grace from a variety of different angles that have cultural or traction in today's world. And the type A, type B distinction, which has become shorthand for people, I think it was one way in.
Yeah, I think so. I look at some of the things in business, and of course, if you apply yourself, you work, you do certain things, you could tend to be successful, hopefully. But some of the times when I've just had something I'd say fall in my lap or things fell into place, or I made no exerted effort for this particular thing to happen. And you just see the grace and the hand of God in orchestrating the whole thing. And you just have to be humble and say, I didn't have anything to do with that. I was just kind of walking in the spirit and letting the grace of God take care of stuff. I didn't pick up the phone and make some phone calls and say, hey, let's all that. And that's such a one of the things that I really see in business. It's just so beautiful when that happens and you know that it's God's unmerited favor. It's just the hand of the Lord.
Isn't that incredible? Because you talk to business leaders or really successful men, and they sometimes phrase their path as, I took these 6 steps and these 6 things happened. But if you listen closely, you often hear, well, this thing just fell in my lap. I was at the right place at the right time, and I don't know how to account for it other than the fact that why me and why not this other guy? I don't know. And that isn't that how it works with our relationships too?
I walked into a meeting and there was no appointment or anything. I just walked into the meeting and they were sitting there speaking my name as I walked in.
Really?
Yes. And so I was like, wow,
Huh.
you can't make this stuff up.
No, honestly, I was giving a talk about the book, Ken, and I wrote an op-ed trying to sell this book, to publicize the book, and I sent it to every national outlet under the sun, and thinking the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the
Yeah.
Washington Post, everyone published this, and it all said no. I got the rejection nonstop. And then out of the clear blue sky, someone in our church approached me and said, "Yeah, do you mind if I write a profile on Mockingbird? I freelance," and someone asked me to do it. And I was like, okay. I gave her 30 minutes to talk and didn't think again about it. And then the week the book comes out, she hands me a USA Today, which I hadn't thought about USA Today since the last time I was in a Hilton or something. And it's got a 2,000 word profile of Mockingbird the week that the book comes out. And I just thought, look at that, Lord. I'm here pushing this boulder up a hill, and you've got this good gift you want to give. And it doesn't depend on me seeing it clearly. There's something beautiful about that. It was all grace.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you say. You say healing is letting the worst version of yourself be loved. And you don't have to pretend that you're not and never can be something else. The grace of God is not there to oppress us.
Yes, it's not. And I think that we're suspicious of good things. We look for a fine print and we doubt the goodness of God. And I think that's natural. And I think God is the hound of heaven. Isn't that what we say? And God's grace can overcomes even our doubts and our stiff arming. And that's the hard-headed people are the only types that God has to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. And you talk about guilt in chapter 5. And I think it's just really interesting as you're observing culture, the world is becoming less religious, less churchianity.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people still feel more condemned now than they did. The standards are supposed to be dropping, yet we feel guiltier.
Isn't that wild? That's one of the great. Someone wrote an article called "The Strange Persistence of Guilt in the Modern Era," and the idea was that as we became less religious, we were supposed to feel less guilty.
Yeah,
the moral law was not there to condemn us at every turn, and the truth is that we've never felt guiltier. And people who are totally a-religious, never go to church, guilt is constantly nipping at their heels, and maybe that's through the condemnation they perceive on social media or the comparative living, or simply just by nature of being alive. And there's nowhere to go with the guilt. And so I feel like grace says that is acquittal for the guilty. We Christians have we use courtroom metaphors because Paul uses courtroom metaphors in the Bible and Jesus is tried. So sometimes you find yourself in the dock, right? And accused. And I think that God's grace is the judge saying, I'll take the punishment myself and you go free. Well, the suffering of the innocent and the substitutionary atonement is what we call it formally. But I find a lot of power in that. And I reference some guy who does some work in prisons who says if he used to think those kinds of understandings of Christianity were too simplistic. And then he started working with men on death row and said, you know what? When they want to hear about guilt and blood that's been shed, and they want some hope that the price has been paid. And that's a important thing to emphasize in a world that doesn't want to talk in those terms. Because how do you address guilty people with the word of grace? You talk about the atonement God has made on their behalf.
Yeah. And atonement, you talk about it, it's just a fancy word for making amends. And if you don't have guilt, forgiveness loses its power.
Yeah, you can't just say you're forgiven without any sense of that you've transgressed. And so, you can't say you've transgressed. In order to say you've transgressed, you have to be honest. And that's what we call repentance, is to become clean about who you really are and the forgiveness you need. And that's what those sort of guys who've been convicted, there's almost, sometimes they talk about it being a relief itself to no longer have to pretend that they're innocent, but to say, I am guilty, and I throw myself on the mercy of the judge. And come to find out, God is merciful. And we know that because of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Like you talk about, some of the churches they want to shy away from atonement theology.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you get into this situation where people have been beaten with that stick in a way, or like you have to constantly, like, you have to atone, actually, is what they're really here, is that it's up to you. Jesus did this, now you better never. I can see how.
That's what Jerry Cantrell says, isn't he? A song, I got to atone here.
Oh, you like that song? I mean, that's a great song. That's I made a playlist for this book, and I
know you did.
Yeah, I have a lot of time for Mr. Cantrell.
But it speaks to the heart of people, like, okay, it's like grace plus I've got to do some effort here. I got to do my part on this day. I got to make atonement.
And before you know it, partial atonement is what people really hate. They say, now it's up to you. And that's a prison. That's a new prison.
Yeah. Boy, the chapters just keep getting better. The relief from status anxiety. Oof.
Yeah, I was proud of that chapter, because it maybe doesn't feel like the same level of guilt and regret and these heavy words, but status anxiety is very real, and it's not just real among people of high status. It's all sort of socioeconomic rungs are very concerned about status and jockeying for status, and are you above me or below me? And
yeah, that's how we rank. That's how we rank everybody. See, have more money than me. Where are we at? Yeah.
What zip code are they living in? What kind of house? Where do they go on vacation? It's everywhere. It's not just middle age. My kids who's in middle school, they do it in different ways there. Who scored the most goals in the soccer game? So yeah, I think grace. I talk about imputation in that chapter, which is a fancy word for saying that God gives you His righteousness, your identity, your sort of all this status anxiety is usually related to some form of establishing your identity according to works of the law. And that imputation means that God imputes in Christ, He imputes righteousness to you, status, in other words, a rock solid status or identity that is not your own, but it's received. And that's, again, to those who are deeply anxious about where they fit and where they sit on the rankings, that's unbelievable relief.
Yeah, just throw some of these out there for the folks. Status, money, zip code, where you live, party invitations. You didn't get that invite, Dave. That's too bad, brother. Advanced degrees, there you go. Body mass index, boy, yeah. Golf handicap. What's your handicap, Dave?
Oh, I'm not even going to repeat it. Yeah.
Busyness, travel, passport stamps, number of page views. Boy, that's a big thing with kids. I think you tell a story in there. What are they? You're telling off on one of your kids, or they want to be with that girl, a YouTube influencer.
Yeah, it was my kid who said
your
that.
Kid, yeah.
Yeah, my youngest. I was not proud, right?
But all of those things, it's just a comparison base, and to tie your self-worth into those different things that they push on us.
Yeah, and I think those things change over time, but the dynamic doesn't. And the technology makes it a little more omnipresent, perhaps, but it is a human trait to want to justify ourselves according to works of the law, and that's what that is. Social righteousness can be more oppressive sometimes than spiritual righteousness, because it's a shifting target, and just when you think you've nailed you look as good as you possibly could, the fashion changes. So that's I think people today really struggle with this, as I do, at least. So I think God's grace actually can connect on that level too.
Now, I look at the young guys coming up in my business, and I want to be a millionaire. I want the bigger house, the swimming pool in the backyard, and I want to be the rich young ruler all over again.
It's right there in the Bible. I mean, I do too, though. I mean, I want this book to do better than any other book.
I ordered 20 copies.
Thank you.
Trying to help you.
Thank you. I mean, Amazon has its rankings, so it's poisonous.
Yeah. Talk to us for a minute about imputation.
Yeah, sort of. The example I give in there is that my older brother got married to a woman named Sarah Beth. And Sarah Beth had spent like the previous 10 years of flying around the world and accruing enormous amounts of miles and platinum status on Delta Airlines. My older brother, on the other hand, he's a minister, a pastor in outside of New York. So you can't really travel that much when you got to be there on church on Sunday. And so when they get married and they go to their honeymoon and they're checking they're going to Thailand, right? And he hasn't been to Thailand. He's so excited about this, and she's paid using miles. And they get to I think it's Kennedy Airport, JFK in New York, outside New York, and the line to check in is a mile long. And they think, oh my goodness, we haven't gotten here with enough time, or this is going to be such a drag. And she says, come with me. And they go to the platinum status line, and it is a much, much shorter line. But John says, I don't have platinum status. But they say, that doesn't matter. You're married to me. And he comes up, they give him his passport, and they check him in. And he says, welcome to Delta. Roll out the red carpet. And so a status that really applied to her was he was sort of enveloped in. In other words, it was imputed to him. It wasn't his own. He didn't bring those miles to the table. She allowed him to be included or to fall under that umbrella. And that's all imputation is. It's saying to consider someone as though they are when they're not. And usually when we're loved, when we're in an unlovable way, we're treated as though we are something that we're not. And it is the how of grace I talk about. And that's how John in that moment understood what imputation was on a gut level, when her status was extended to him, not because of anything he did, but because she had freely associated herself with him out of love. So it all, I thought it mapped pretty closely onto that. It's also like it's a kind of a Lutheran word that has been impoverished a little bit. So I'm trying to reclaim it. I think it's a really good word.
Yeah, continue along that line of thought with Jesus and the children, the culture in his time with children.
Yeah, well, children brought nothing. They had no status. The whole point was we think of children as being innocent and kind of blessed in some sort of way that doesn't include the radicality of Jesus saying, you let them come unto me, and blessed are the meek and those to whom the kingdom will belong, unless you become like a child. He's talking about those who have no status, who can only, whatever they get in life, they have to receive with open arms. They don't have any political, any economic power. And so that's the radicality of that statement, is that those who have been imputed to you're blessed if you're working hard and you're an adult and you're obsessed with what you've earned or what you haven't earned or what you've accrued. You're gonna have a lot harder time being like a child in that regard. So I see those of us who are to be like a child is not to be innocent. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about to be dependent and to be empty-handed when it comes to receiving the imputed righteousness of Christ.
Yeah. I like what you say. We're not loved by God because we're special. We're special because we're loved by God.
Thank you. I'm
Flip
sure
that on
someone
its
else
head.
someone else must have said that, but I hadn't heard it anywhere.
I'm
So
trying to give you credit for it.
but it's true. We want to be loved because we're special, but we're special because we're loved. And that's a totally different approach to life.
Moving on here, the relief from keeping up, Dave. You don't feel that pressure, do you, brother?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's the condition of modernity, of modern life, is acceleration. Everything's always getting faster, more. The travel teams used to start when kids were in sixth grade, and now they start when they're in second grade. And it's churches now need to have 4 services instead of 3. It's not just technology that's gotten faster. It's everything is sort of accelerated. And I feel that as a person who is under demand. I mean, just you think of inflation. Just I need more money this year to maintain what I have than I needed last year, for that simple purpose that Diet Coke now costs $9 for a 12-pack rather than 6. And so I think to a world that is sort of told more, bigger, stronger, faster, the grace of God says you can rest. God gives rest to those who are sleep to those who are weary. And again, it's kind of about it's kind of about what we're talking about in the last chapter as well, imputation. But I think rest is a stronger word for it, because God does not look at us saying you need to produce more in order to be loved, or that you're only loved according to your productivity or your output or your busyness. or your ability to keep up with the Joneses or keep up with the stock market or keep up with the news or keep up with whatever, that in fact you're free to rest. You're a child, not an employee.
Yeah. Your wife gave you concert tickets for your anniversary.
I love Peter Gabriel. And she got us concert tickets for our wedding anniversary. And what the grace is not being told slow down. Grace is when we experience grace, we experience relief when God somehow punctures our inner internal idea that we have, that everything is up to us, and that the only good things in life we get are going to be the things that we effort into existence. And occasionally people experience resonance, is the word that Hartmut Rosa uses for it. It's when you feel alive and you're in the world that is good, and you have not sort of, it's not a result of your efforts. So when I went to that concert, all of a sudden I'm in the present tense. It's like being in the presence of a beautiful baby or something like that, or a sunrise or something like that, where you all of a sudden are stopped in your tracks and you experience resonance, the idea that there is goodness out there that exists independent of your ability to manufacture it. And that's grace. I think that I felt God's presence in that moment. It wasn't and it felt like rest to me, even though it was active and I was standing on my feet and I was listening to something. I felt rooted, but in something good. It's not even, you can hear me explaining it. It's one of these sort of know it when you see it type things. But to a world that's accelerating and constantly thinking about where am I going next and more, to be stopped in your tracks by God and to realize, oh my goodness, there's more going on here than I realized. Or you might fall off the treadmill for a moment, but that's when when you're touched, I think, by the grace of God.
Yeah. Well, what's one thing you hope the readers will walk away with after they finish reading this book, The Big Relief?
Well, I want it to feel like relief. I mean, that's why I designed the cover the way it is, or that's why I made sure it's like, well, it's got to feel like relief. It can't be too long. The colors have to be refreshing. I don't want people to walk away feeling like they just have to understand grace more deeply. Like, I want them to feel like they've been addressed by God, or at least they've seen what it might be like to be addressed by God in those moments. I don't want folks walking away, just like I don't want them walking away from church with spiritual homework. I want them to be excited, to be relieved, and to think maybe I could risk my life on the rumor of grace. So I kind of know what I don't want it to do. And there can be a time sometimes when people talk a lot about grace, there can be this hidden sense that if only you understood grace more, then that would fix everything. And there's probably some truth to that, just like there is in all of the law. But what the book is trying to proclaim is that even though you fail to completely understand who God is, God loves you nonetheless, and that there are good gifts in store for you, both here and in the life to come. So I don't know. I want people to feel lighter after they finish reading it. I want them to feel energized if they possibly can, and maybe a little bit of freedom, some creativity, some play.
But I think it's a book you can give to people who aren't even Christians. And
Oh, thank you, Ken.
I think that they would take this, and I know it's got theology in it and all that, but I could give this to some people in the business world, and I think they would read it and go, wow, man, that guy's on to something there. I may not buy into everything he's saying about Jesus and God and atonement and whatever right now, but I'm open to it. But
Well, that's who I wrote it with. I wrote it with that in mind. I mean, I think inside every Christian lurks a non-Christian, or we're all a mix of things. But I think there's a lack of books that you could feel comfortable giving to folks that aren't. I mean, I didn't want to be lightweight, but I really wanted to write with sort of take a few steps back and say, well, this is what I find so urgent about Christianity is this idea that's right at the heart of who God says he is in Jesus, that God is full of grace, and not that there's something good here that speaks to your actual life as a person who's worn out.
yeah, one more for here, Dave.
All right.
You up for one more?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Where have you experienced the most profound forms of grace personally, either receiving it or seeing it work in others?
That's a wonderful question. Well, over the years of being in ministry, you do get to see the dead come to life occasionally. And I don't mean that. I mean, I've talked to people who in the mission field have seen the wildest things, and I don't doubt it. But I've seen defeated, broken, angry people turn into joyful, generous, warm-hearted souls. and I've seen 180s. I've seen people experience freedom from addiction. The place I usually go when I need to find sort of God did for us what we could not do for ourselves is usually when people are talking in terms of addiction. And I would say I've seen that in my family, my immediate, my whole bloodline, shall we say, has a lot of addiction in it, and yet also a lot of God's grace in the midst of addiction. And that has been very powerful to me. I don't feel totally comfortable naming names. I have had a few bosses, mentors in my life, one of whom was a therapist, one of whom is a pastor, one of whom is a sponsor type person. And they've all treated, grace has been at the center of how they've treated me. Meaning, when I've been most wrongheaded or full of you know what, they have loved me still. And but of course, the place you see it the most, or I'm fortunate enough to have seen it, is in my marriage. I have a wife who's put up with a lot, and this guy who speaks and writes about grace so much, and he's doesn't seem to be able to show it to himself. I've had a cheerleader, but also an advocate there in a way that makes it a little easier to talk about publicly. I realize that not everyone's. Sometimes people feel like they're married to an enemy at best, but I have gotten to experience that, and more in my middle age than I did when I was in my 20s. But I think I've seen God be gracious to me with my children. I feel like I made all sorts of mistakes with my kids that I thought were irreparable or I thought would doom me or them. And I've seen the Lord answer prayers for them in ways that I just didn't see coming. It's a surprising. Grace is a surprise. So those are the things: addiction and compulsion and marriage and as a father, but also through older mentor types who have persisted when I've given them every reason not to.
I'll give you the last shot here, Dave. Just anything you want to share. And also, as you go into that, how can people contact you? You got websites or email or any of that sort of stuff you want to lay out there?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Ken. I mean, I do hope what you said at the end is exactly my deepest prayer, and I find it the biggest compliment when people say it's something they would feel comfortable giving to someone, a non-Christian or a family member or something like that, because that means that the book, that there's a gracious tone to it, that it's not an attacking book. You don't. No one wants it to be attacked, and it's hard sometimes to find books like that. So when you say that, that's what I encourage folks. That's my deepest prayer for the book, that it would be a bridge building book for folks who don't feel like they have anything like that. You can find me at Mockingbird, mbird.com. That's not like fire ember, but like Mockingbird, mbird.com. I co-host the Mockingcast, which is every 2 weeks. It's not out in the summer. We write a magazine called The Mockingbird. You can find me there. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm happy to interact with folks. And I travel around the country and speak from time to time. So there's a schedule for me, but mainly just you can reach out. My email is simply davidzahl@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from folks.
All right. We'll post all that up in the show notes. And thanks again for your time today, David. It's a pleasure to visit with you and talk to you for the first time. Hopefully it's the first of many.
Thank you, Ken.
But anyway, God bless you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for the encouragement.
Yeah.
God bless you.